Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. You might recognize me as Jeffalytics. For years, I've been a listener of podcasts, and for just as long, I've thought about starting my own podcast. Well, I finally got things started, and I'm happy to announce that we've landed a great guest for our first episode of the podcast. For episode 1, I couldn't be happier to be having a conversation with Rand Fishkin of Moz. But first, a little bit about me. I'm a digital marketer and digital nomad. I'm currently traveling in New Zealand, and by the time this episode goes live, I'll actually be in the island territory of New Caledonia. Probably have no idea where that is, and I am barely sure where it is myself. But I've been in the digital marketing industry for my entire career, and for the past 5 years, I spent a great deal of time teaching digital marketing and analytics classes, as well as speaking to thousands of marketers all over the world. One question that always comes up is, how do you get into marketing with no experience, contacts, or formal education? It's easy to share my own story, which can pretty much be summarized as create your own experiences, even if it means working for free. But I also began to wonder how others got their start in the industry. During all these conversations, aka happy hours, I started to ask my fellow marketers, how do they get established? And the answers were fascinating. So after enough of these happy hour meetings, the idea for my podcast was born. We're calling it the Jumpstart podcast because that's exactly what we're going to do here. Is we're going to show you how to jumpstart your career by listening to the stories of some of the most successful marketers that I know. This is our first episode, so go easy on me. Before we get started, I wanted to have a word from our sponsor. Do you ever wonder how Google makes money? It's from people clicking on all those ads in search results. Do you ever wonder why companies would pay Google billions of dollars to show up in those little search ads? Because it's one of the most effective ways to generate new business online. Do you want to make money for your business? Then it's time to learn about how to advertise on Google like the pros. Introducing PPC Course, an online video class that will take you from zero to Google certified in as little as 30 days. Taught by yours truly, Jeff, the host, I take you through the process of setting up a Google AdWords account, show you how to advertise profitably, and generate revenue using Google AdWords. Check out ppccourse.net for more information. Now on to the main event. Rand Fishkin. You probably know him as the husband of Geraldine, a hilarious travel blogger. Perhaps you know him as the Wizard of Moz, or as one of the most fashionable men in SEO. I call him a friend and a mentor. I've been learning from Rand for years, and even though we've hung out in person several times, there are some questions that I've always wanted to ask him, but I never had the nerve to ask. Today, I ask him those questions. Like, what was the name of SEO Moz when they were just a web design agency? We get to answer that question and many more. If you want to hear Rand's inspiring journey from how he was in hundreds of thousands of debt to now being part of a white-hot venture-backed startup, then you got to listen closely here. And just a reminder, you can view your show notes to this podcast by going to jeffalytics.com/Rand. Let's look back to the beginning. And I know, the story is that you dropped out of college to join your mom's company, which became Moz. But even before that, when was the first time that you recall that you got somebody interested in something you had to sell or something that you could do? When is the first time that you realized that you have a gift for getting people interested in products or services or anything that you do?
That is a question I've never been asked before. When I was in high school, I volunteered at an elementary school through kind of a family friend connection. It was basically a program where I was assistant teaching a science class to elementary school kids with the professor who was actually running the class. It was at a private school, so I didn't have to go through a bunch of hurdles at the time. Or maybe it was totally illegal that I was there. I don't know. But I remember in those classroom sessions being able to get kids really excited about science, specifically like astronomy and chemistry, a little bit of physics, geography. And it was so much fun. It was a great experience. It made me want to create things that people paid attention to, that helped them learn or see the world in a new way. So I think that's the first time I can ever recall having that feeling.
Excellent. And so it seems like almost like a academic learning where you, just by being around people, you realize that you can get people interested in something, whereas they might find it boring. Science is not always the most interesting topic, but you found a way to go at it. And obviously for some people, it's very interesting. But for the average middle school student or the average student, they're like, oh, science, okay. Some of them will excel at it, but a lot of them don't really know where to go about it. And so that's great. And this is really, I think that a lot of us find that we have that opportunity early on, but it's not always something that we put structure around. We don't really know, how do we make money off of it? How do we use it as a way to do anything with it? We just know, hey, people actually cared about what was going on. People cared enough that we did this thing, and I want some more of it. And I'm guessing that your more of it probably still happened in high school, but then, I really want to get into this college experience because I've read the stories in paper. I've heard you talk about it before, but how does the college experience factor into this?
So I'll be transparent again. I didn't have a terrific experience in high school or particularly in college. And that's not to say that I didn't enjoy my time there. I think I had fun, but I was not engaged by the vast majority of my classes. So there were a couple exceptions where I was, ooh, this is really cool, I'm enjoying it. Vast majority, not the case. And I had started doing, some web design and development contract work on the side for, my mom's small business clients. And that was really fun, like making a website, building out these pages. At the time, I was doing a lot of like animations and stuff with Flash. And that was really cool, right? It was cool to imagine taking information and then conveying it across the web and having anybody be able to access it. And the web was really hot, right? Like in 98, 99, before the dot-com crash. So that kind of led me from, I should stay in school and I should go get a finance degree and I should try and find a job with that, to screw this whole thing. I'm going to drop out. I'm just going to do this web design thing. And then that didn't actually go very well, but it was the catalyst.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I think that's the same. I started out the same way. When in the middle of college, I found people would pay me money to make websites for them. And I was doing Flash and just like you and yep. creating things. And as a young, I think you're a couple of years older than me, but as a teen, having people give you money to do something that has your skills is a really interesting thing. I think it creates two dynamics. One is that it makes you think that this is going to happen forever, that as long as you have these skills, people are always going to pay you, and that money is easy, and that opportunities are always going to be there, which I think can be a bad thing. I think that it's not great that we think that, because then this other side happens, which you're talking about, is if the website industry crashes or if budgets get lower, then we realize that we're working with really just a mastery of technology, or a light mastery of technology when nobody else got it, but we didn't really develop a skill that's sustainable in the long run. Or when you said that things didn't go as well as you thought once you did get into the business, can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So we were doing primarily web design and then building websites and just handing them off very simply. And that the demand for that, especially among like the small and medium business segment that we were working with in the Seattle area, which was, really a handful of clients, not more than a dozen, went, kind of belly up. Like we weren't able to find new clients. The clients we were building stuff for became more unreliable with payment, more picky about price. The competition was increasing because there was a lot more people entering the web design development business. So we were really struggling. We went pretty deeply into debt between 2000 and 2005. We went pretty deeply into debt. And eventually it kind of led us down this path toward SEO. So we had a few clients that we were working on building stuff. We were building stuff on spec, right? Like they didn't pay us. We just built it. And then we hoped that the new website would help them convert more customers. And then they'd pay us some percentage of the revenue, which honestly is a terrible model. I think we did that 4 or 5 times. Twice, we actually got paid anything. 3 times, not really.
That's a really good lesson for us all to know, is that working on spec or working for people who want to do a revenue share, it sounds great because of the top amount of money we can make. We can make a lot more money that way, but it almost never works out that way, because the people who are, if they're making a ton of money, are they really going to give you $1 million? Are they really going to give you $2 million to do these things? And probably not, because that's just not how business works in the most part. It's not your money, it's their money. I learned that lesson as well. There's a lot of people who do they want all your time, all your energy, all your value, and they don't want to pay for it unless it's valuable. Continuing on, the debt, I know that's a really, probably a tough piece of your life, and it's something that probably still haunts you in certain ways. So the debt was basically both market conditions, so understanding that the market turned when you were looking to do things. Did the debt itself go towards paying employees? Did it go for office space? Was it infrastructure? Was there anything you would do differently now that you've learned because of that process?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, first off, nearly every expense that we had was non-necessary. So we had marketing and advertising expenses. We had some web hosting and technology expenses. Most of our expenses, though, of course, were rent and people. And we did not need a fancy office space, which we thought we needed to be able to convert clients. And we did not need, we didn't really try with employees. Like my salary for those 5 years was $1,600 a month. And even into 2006-07, there were plenty of months where I only got one of those paychecks, so only $800. And my mom wasn't taking a salary at all. We had one programmer on staff, Matt Inman, he's now known as the Oatmeal. So he and I used to stay at the office late and play Counter-Strike and just, sort of screw around. But he wasn't making much at all either. It was just rough times. So yeah, the debt went to pay mostly rent and people, even though those expenses weren't that huge. And then the big problem was not, I think we had maybe $130,000 in debt, but then we weren't able to make the minimum payments for a couple months. And so then, the interest rate spikes up and you start getting penalties lobbed on top of that. So I think by 2005, we actually owed $500,000.
Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, it's great that you've come out from under that, but I think that's a good lesson for everybody to know is that debt ultimately everything comes down to revenues, right? You need to have some kind of path or some kind of understanding that you're going to make enough money to pay off that debt. Otherwise, it's not worth it to go into it. I have a similar story myself. I was in not nearly as much, but somewhere around $20,000 in debt. And I realized that I could only make the minimum payments, and that at having my job at the time, the only thing I'd ever be able to do with my life is to make minimum payments, and I'd never get ahead of it. I would never pay it off. And that was when I started freelancing as well. I mean, that's when I started to realize that I needed to do more. I needed to give up the TV. I needed to give up nights and weekends and make enough money so that I could get ahead of the game. And fortunately for both of us, I think we've been able to turn it around since then. But I think that's a valuable lesson for all of us, is that we need to have some kind of sign that there's going to be something good coming out of this. Otherwise, it's not worth it to go into that debt. Going into debt because you think something might happen is usually it's a reason to stay in debt. Obviously, want to get into how you turned it around, but let's continue on this path. I think it's really interesting. I had actually had written down, I wanted to ask you about Matthew and the oatmeal, and so I've been following you and sort of been in the Moz community for 10 years now. So right when you guys were starting to turn it around with that process, when you started going away from web design agency, then getting into SEO and turning it around to the point where all this demand was there. You had so much demand that it would probably be difficult for you to capitalize on it. How did you transition from doing project work or working on spec and not really necessarily having the respect of the clients? How did you make the change?
So really it was the blog. I had started what was the SEO Moz blog in 2003, put it on its own domain on seomoz.org in 2004. And that blog had built some popularity by 2005 and then into 2006. And I got invited to speak at a couple conferences, which I could barely afford to go to. And I had to crash at my grandparents' place. And, it was pretty nuts. But that blog is what eventually drove customer demand, right? So it turned out that instead of us getting inquiries for web design clients, we were getting inquiries for SEO clients, and folks who wanted SEO in general. They already had a website. They knew how they were making money from it. They had the money to pay for SEO, right? They wanted these results. They could see how driving traffic from search would get them a return on their investment. And so they were looking to improve that. And that just meant better quality, more on time paying customers. It was the blog that really turned it around.
That's great. So SEO Moz to you at the time was just a blog, right? It was it was a .org even. You didn't really have a lot of plans to commercialize it. It was sort of just hey, I'm going to try this. If we're preaching to people that we need to blog for SEO, I need to do it myself. I need to experiment with it. If we're going to be recommending content, if we're going to be recommending these things, I should be doing it myself. So it's sort of like an experimental area. Question, what was the name of your company before SEO Moz was invented as a brand?
That's something nobody knows.
Yeah.
It was called, so my mom founded that company, I think in 1981, and that was called Outlines West.
Okay. Outlines West. And it was sort of a marketing services company for the whole time until the digital area came around.
it was a one woman, right? It was just my mom doing it from 81 to 2000. And then I think even maybe the first year or so, I was kind of just a subcontractor. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until 2001 that became a business of any kind, right? And she was the president and CEO. I was just a guy who makes websites.
Fascinating. Well, there we go. We learned another new thing that nobody's asked you before. Yeah. That's great. I've been curious about that for years. And then, okay, so another funny thing about your blog and that I think was interesting is I used to read it as a way, I was very young and I didn't really have much business sense. And so even the posts you wrote about how much you should price, how do you do these things, that was really helpful for me. How much should you charge for your services? What's the difference between a retainer versus a minimum? How much do you charge per project? And so I use that a lot with my own clients. And the funny thing is I was working with Fortune, 100 type companies, wow. But I was just regurgitating what you were saying on Moz as to what their strategy should be. So it was really interesting. And I remember in a meeting, I said, here's what we should be doing. And I showed them a post from Moz and they go, why don't we just hire that Rand guy from Moz? And I was like, I can do this for you. I think that people did notice, right away along the whole lines, because it was the only way you could get straight answers to what you were looking for. And I'm sure that alienated some people who had the answers but didn't want that being public. But for I'd say the majority of people and the majority of the greater good, it was an excellent resource to have all that available.
Yeah, I think it would be very hard to replicate, at least in the SEO industry, right? Because the timing of it was such a big part of that. So making the operations of search engines and how rankings worked and how specific tactics worked or didn't work transparent at that time was not very popular. There was a few other blogs. Obviously, Aaron Wall's SEO book, right, was very popular. Came out right around the same time that SEO Moz launched. And, those two resources were talked about frustratingly by many folks in the existing SEO community at the time, because they were like, hey, this is trade secret stuff. Like, this is the kind of thing that, we earn our living on. You're not supposed to make it transparent. And I'm really grateful to people like Danny Sullivan who recognized the value of that transparency and helped amplify it and broadcast it at conferences and tried to make this, less of a secretive world. And that's certainly what we were trying to do too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that in retrospect, I can see why people, everybody's resistant to change, especially if it's something they view as proprietary. But in the long run, there's more, the industry now, it's now an industry as opposed to just being a niche area. And things only become an industry when there's a big enough market to support it. The market has grown. There's some of the efforts that you've done as well as just by being out there. And so I think that there's a lot of great things that have come out of this as a result of the things we do as SEOs and people who practice that. So, okay, so you had the blog. I've always thought of it as an extremely high quality resource, but the quality over the years has gotten better and better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now the blog has, an audience development team, and Cyrus and Trevor and Isla are watching every post that goes out and editing it. And, we have a much better CMS and, engineers who work on the front end of that. Yeah, you just can't compare. You go back to the posts from 04, 05, 06. It was fine for the time. Yeah. But you wouldn't expect anyone to tweet or share or link to those kind of posts today.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's a good sign. I mean, you sort of ridden the curve of the evolution of what you need to do in a blog. I think back in the day, just having a blog was enough. Just writing every day, every week was enough. There are a lot of the people that I still read today are the ones who are doing it consistently. They've just been around longer. I think now to stand out, you need to not just be consistent. You need to be consistent, and you need to really push hard on these other things that make you better. You need to do what the term that you've adopted, 10x content, in order to even be noticed in the first place, because there's just so much out there. There's so many pieces of saturation that you need to do something different in order to stand out from a crowd.
Agreed.
And speaking of doing something different to stand out from a crowd, I want to hear about the yellow shoes. So I've read many articles about it, as if they say the only reason why Rand's successful is because he wore yellow shoes. And sure, there might be some of that, maybe if that's what you need. But just from your perspective, like, what did that mean to you? Was that a notice me? Was that a get people to talk to me? Or is it just sort of a coincidence?
It was a notice me and get people to talk to me, because basically I was going to my first conference in New York. I think that was 2005. And I had been on all these forums and kind of chat rooms and all this stuff, but with uh, my avatar wasn't a picture of me. It was a picture of Jon Stewart from The Daily Show. So I was like a big Daily Show fan. And would, kind of ridiculous, but I had this like, oh no, I'm going to go to this conference. I'm going to see all these people that I've met online, but I won't know them and they won't know me. So I made this post that, hey, I found these yellow shoes, like kind of next to the university where I was living in this shoe store. So I'm going to wear these to the conference. And if you see me wearing them, like say hi. And 10 minutes after I walked into the show in New York, Barry Schwartz, right, from Search Engine Roundtable, walks over to me and he's like, you must be Rand Fishkin.
Nice.
Right? Or you must be Rand Fish, because that was what I used on the things. And we had a nice chat and like have been friends ever since, and I've probably seen him in 24 cities around the world. But it's crazy. It's pretty, it was not an intentional marketing tactic, but then it became this association that people had. So every year I still try and wear them to at least a couple conferences. I always wear them at MozCon.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great lesson on personal branding. I think now we sort of use Twitter or, mostly Twitter to sort of meet people at conferences. But I think there's something to be said for finding an audience and getting them to pay attention to you or to at least notice you in some way. And so that's one way to do it. I think that it is tough to meet people at conferences, even if you've read their stuff or met them before. Yeah. Brilliant way to go about things. And I think others should think that. I know there's some people that have their signatures, and that's sort of how I know who they are when I've never met them in person. So I think that works great. So let's continue on the path then. So you're publishing this blog and getting people to notice you. Was there a turning point or a type of content, maybe the Whiteboard Fridays? What was it that really made it to the point where you were no longer concerned about getting there, but you thought that you were there as far as being noticed or being as popular as you thought that you'd be?
Interesting. I mean, Jeff, I still don't think I'm there, but let's see. I would say there were definitely big turning points, but I don't think I recognized them as such at the time. It's only in reflection that they seem, that it feels like they had this massive impact. But the two, I think one came out in, maybe they were both 2005, actually. So in 2005, we released two pieces of content that we've continued to maintain for the last 10, 11 years. And those were the Beginner's Guide to SEO, which I wrote personally, and now it's been edited and there's a whole team of people who go and make sure that thing's great and updated and all that. But I wrote the whole thing myself and published it on our blog, thinking that lots of people who read, we were featured in Newsweek magazine, literally the magazine that's on the shelves. Newsweek it had big distribution, but there weren't honestly a lot of people who read that story. But in my head, I was like, oh my God, thousands of people are going to be coming to our website wondering about SEO. I need to write a beginner's guide to SEO so people can learn this stuff. So we put that out for free. And what actually happened was it got Slashdotted. So someone submitted it to Slashdot, which at the time was like Hacker News plus Dig plus Reddit. And it went to the top of that. It was on a bunch of other news sites. A ton of people linked to it and talked about it. It started ranking on the first page for SEO and SEO guide and Learn SEO and all these things. And then we released the ranking factors. So we had this, search engine ranking factors document. We do it every 2 years. 6th edition. We do it every 2 years. And that first one, it was just awesome. So it surveyed, it had no correlations because we couldn't run correlations, and there was no link data at the time because we hadn't built Linkscape yet. Majestic didn't exist. Ahrefs didn't exist.
Wasn't there Yahoo Site Explorer back then?
Yeah, you had Yahoo Site Explorer. Exactly. We surveyed, actually, I think that might have been it was like just when Google turned off the link command, before Yahoo launched Site Explorer. So anyway, not crazy times, but we put out that document that was like a survey of 75 prominent SEOs and their opinions, and we aggregated that data and collected it. And that document was read by like hundreds of thousands of marketers and people in the SEO field over the next couple of years. So I think those two documents together kind of formed the basis for this reputation that Moz built. They brought us a lot of blog subscribers. They brought us a lot of client inquiries. They brought speaking invitations and conferences, just kind of a ball that kept rolling downhill.
Yeah, right? It sounds like what differentiated you. Well, the first thing is you differentiated. A lot of people wonder why they don't rise from the crowd. And you just gave several examples of things you did that are above and beyond what we expect we need to do to get noticed. The Yellow Shoes is a great example. I had mentioned Whiteboard Friday, which I hope we can talk some more about, but that's a good example too. There's very few people doing weekly videos and putting their personality out there, and you were sort of ahead of the game with that. And then we're talking about the beginners. So trying to go after newbies is always a good way to go, because there's more people who want to get into it than there are people who are super established. So it's either playing inside baseball or preaching to the choir by going with advanced documents, or you're trying to expand the overall market, right? You're trying to create a market for SEO, which I think Beginner's Guide helps there. I've sent that out to several people. And then you have the ranking factors. These are all, and I think these are all examples of what you call 10x content, things that are coming out there that are doing well, and things that are going above and beyond. So that leads to another question that I have, and that is, how much time went into this? Because I think a lot of people are concerned about, one, spending time on something and then not knowing if it's going to work or not, which is a very valid concern. I waste a lot of time on things that I don't know if they're going to work or not. And other people are concerned about, how do they promote it and how do they get in front of people? Is it worth it to do all this time?
It was worth it for us, but I mentioned to you those two pieces of content that did remarkably well, right? That, maybe we'd say, hey, those are 10 times better than anything else that was out there at the time, which, yeah, they probably were. But both of those were investments of weeks, if not months, of my personal time, and then some of, at the time, I think Matt was helping do the HTML, CSS for them both. Beginner's Guide didn't require very much, but Ranking Factors certainly did require some substantive, kind of design chops to get released. And in each of those cases, you're talking about 2 out of the 3 people working at the company putting in weeks worth of work on speculative projects, right? Projects that we have no idea if they're going to have an ROI. We just hope that they will. And we had many, many other projects like that did not work, that totally failed, both for clients and internally for ourselves. So, the thing about 10x content or trying to do that is you should anticipate that you're going to try 5, 6, 7 things before you hit once.
Mm-hmm. I think that we should all strive to create great content. What I tell my students in class is that we all have one piece of great content in us. We can all do it once. Just like your first album for a musician, you can always do a first one. You can always be a one-hit wonder. It's turning it into a sustainable business or something that can keep on going. That's really the hard part, or the important part. But we should be spending our time and our effort, if we want this to work, especially around the content or our own personal brand or our brand of our company, we need to do that one. We need to do that one great piece, and we need to have a good idea. We can all come up with one good idea. And then from there, that's what marketing is as an organization, is to turn it into something that's more sustainable. That's what a company is versus what an individual is contributing. It sounds like you had a lot of just, hey, I think this is going to work, and I know this is something that needs to be done, and I'm going to spend the time to do it. It takes time and effort, and it's not guaranteed that it's going to work. And I think that's a good transition into the next piece, and that is, so you had a web design agency that wasn't doing well because we sort of established why, and then you pivoted, if you want to call it that, into SEO services, or that was you're primarily known for that, and then the business started coming in droves, or at least the agency business appeared on the surface to be doing well in generating revenue. But then you also realized that, I want to talk about the realization that maybe SEO services wasn't the right path for you, and how you went from a services company with some tools on your own end to a tool company with no services at all.
Yeah, so it was not very strategic. There wasn't a realization hey, if we go with the SaaS business model, we get recurring revenue, it's valued higher by investors and the broader markets, and none of that stuff. We didn't know squat about any of those things. But we knew that when we shared stuff, it sometimes did really well. So we wanted to share all these tools that we built, which all these tools was 6 or 7 really simple tools that today you can get almost all of that functionality for free somewhere on the web. Mm-hmm. But we had this little collection that was very helpful. And so we put that, we made it available publicly. But what we realized is hey, you know what? If we make it available publicly, our web hosting and server costs and all that kind of stuff are going to spike up, and we can't really afford it. So we're going to have to gate most of the tools kind of behind a paywall. So we're okay, let's just make it $29 a month. You can PayPal it to us, and then we'll give you access. And we'll just use the same login system that we use for the blog already. So Matt built that. I think he actually built that right before he left Moz, because he was doing his own stuff. He had built like a dating website and sold that off. But he essentially built that process and then left Moz a little later that year. That was 2007. We launched it in, I think, February of 2007. And the blog started driving all these people to the tools, right? And they were free tools that, if you used enough of it, then you'd have to pay for it. So that freemium model for us was like scaling up and up. By, I want to say like August of that year, we were making as much money from the software subscription as we were from all our paying clients combined. And we kind of went, oh my God, this is crazy.
So you didn't even have to, it wasn't even a decision. It sounds like It was, the decision was made for you. You were floating around almost half of a decade for you in this company and all this debt and everything like that. And then suddenly you found something that had that growth that you couldn't even imagine.
Exactly. So, it kind of just grew on its own and became this, big revenue channel. And so at that time, a couple of investors reached out to us. Kelly Smith, who's with Curious Office in Seattle. He actually works for Starbucks in China now. He's like their VP of China, but he's an awesome guy. And Michelle Goldberg, who is a partner at Ignition Partners, a local venture capital firm. They both reached out and started talking independently to me over the summer. And were like, hey, this seems really interesting. This model's very interesting. SEO seems like a cool space. Would you maybe want to raise some money and do something? I didn't know what venture capital was. Mm-hmm. Like when Michelle emailed me, I had to Google it. What's venture capital? So that was, not very sophisticated at the time. And we ended up chatting with them over the summer. And then at the end of 2007, November, they put in $1.1 million and I became the CEO. So before that, right, my mom had been running the show, but our new investors were like, well, we want Rand to be CEO. So we had a long conversation about whether we wanted to take this money and shift the structure. We just paid off our debt. I think we paid off our debt in June of 2007. So we just barely gotten out of debt.
Yeah.
So it was a tough decision, but kind of put us on the path to Moz and the company we became today.
Yeah. Around that time, I remember seeing your announcement. I was as surprised as anybody. I mean, because I think we sort of knew that the tools were useful, and a lot of people that were doing SEO were using the tools and getting familiar with them. And I think I was a paid member by then as well. But to see that decision, it was like, man, I don't know if I second guessed it because I just didn't know enough. I didn't know what was going on, but it's like, why is SEO Moz taking capital? What are they? Yeah. What the heck are they doing here? Why are they doing this? And so it almost sounds like it surprised you as much as it surprised the rest of us. You just probably were a couple months ahead of the game and you sort of had more ideas to the finances and everything.
I mean, I'll be honest, the thing that really made me want to take the money and grow the company was what you talked about, Yahoo Site Explorer and the Google link command and like Google taking away all their link information. And I had heard rumors that Yahoo was going to shut down Site Explorer as well, which they ended up doing in, I think it was like 3 or 4 years later, 2010 or 2011. I had this we don't understand how Google ranks pages, and that's because we can't calculate our own version of PageRank, and we're relying on Google, and we can't see all the links, so we can't see which ones are followed and no followed. And we need a link index. And so I wanted to build this kind of, the back end of Google search engine, the index and all the views and data and the calculations, so that we could make the operations of Google more transparent. And I thought, hey, this tools thing, that's a way for us to do that and still make money with it. I had and still have sometimes a very nonprofit mindset. I'm like, no, our mission is to help marketers. Our mission is to figure out how Google works. Our mission is to help people understand all this stuff. Revenue is just the way that we're able to keep paying rent on our apartment while we do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good way to go about it, right? Is that revenue comes from doing good as opposed to, trying to squeeze it out of customers. So I think you're very transparent with customers as to what they get and what's available there. One of the things that I've always thought this, and you just confirmed it. I think the the smartest move that Moz ever made was to create a metric that SEOs used as their replacement for PageRank. So using domain and page authority and getting that into people's lexicon and their terms that they use when delivering an audit or when delivering health to a company is so vital now to the industry that it's really hard to decouple that. And so it creates a stickiness with the product. It creates an opportunity for people to, if you are the metric that people use and it costs money to get that metric beyond a certain point, then you have a customer base that really needs what's there. And so I think that was a brilliant move on your part. Maybe you didn't know it or not. I'm not sure if that was like a planned thing or.
Yeah, MozRank was like the initial version of that, right? And then we managed to build, we built these better metrics over time, domain and page authority, and those have continued to be sort of leading indicators, well correlated with how a page ranks or domain ranks based on its link profile.
All these moves that you've made and all these things you've done have combined to creating a really well-respected company. You have the great conference. You have you're very transparent with your finances, so we can sort of see how the health's doing. You've gotten more rounds of funding. How have things changed as you've sort of gotten these things that you were dreaming about before, and as they're getting to be reality and things that are in front of you? Has it created new challenges? Or
yeah, so raising capital puts you on an interesting path, right? It takes away a lot of the options that many private companies have, which is like, hey, let's be profitable and make money and have a great business. And if we're growing, 20, 30% in a year, that's awesome. It takes off the table selling the company at a sort of smaller price that might make the founders or the employees happy, but doesn't return 10 times the investor's money. It takes off the table spinning down the company and trying something else if you don't like the model you're going with or you want to do something new. So, there's a lot of freedom and flexibility that comes with not taking capital. Like every path is open to you. If you do raise money, you have three options. Option one, you can fail, and most venture-backed companies do fail. They die. Two, you can sell to another company, hopefully for some very nice multiplier on the capital that you've raised so that everyone makes money, but very often at a number that means that the investors are the only ones who make money. Sometimes investors and founders a little bit, rarely employees. So sale is awesome, but it can be very risky. And I think we usually hear about, in the tech news, you usually hear about the big, huge, awesome sales, not about the 15 or 20 that happened that same day that were not particularly great deals. Mm-hmm. And then the third option is you can make a public offering, an IPO, right, on something like the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange or one of the European stock exchanges, that kind of thing. And that's, for many folks, kind of like many investors, that's kind of the dream scenario because you can oftentimes maximize your revenue that way. For founders, sometimes that's a dream because it means you get to stay independent, although you're now a public company and subject to a lot of restrictions and requirements that private companies are not. I think Moz we're kind of past the point of dying, so that's that's nice to not be dying. That's not to say that something terrible couldn't happen. Knock on wood. We've had scary moments, plenty of them, but we are probably looking at a sale or an IPO in the next 5 to 6 years. So Moz is going to do about a little under 40 million in revenue this year, growing about 24-25% over last year. If that growth rate can get back up to maybe 30-35%, 40%, then it's a few years from an IPO, and then probably operate independently. I know Sarah, who's now our CEO, she's very passionate about becoming a public company because she doesn't want to be owned by someone else.
Yeah.
I'm a little more agnostic, but
yeah. Excellent. So, this is amazing, really, the progression going from, the debt in web design to now you're looking at becoming close to becoming a publicly traded, already almost $40 million in revenue technology company, software as a service. So that's a really remarkable journey.
It's weird though, because it doesn't feel very different. Like I still rent an apartment. I don't own a we walk to work. Geraldine and I are not very financially stable. Like we're okay, right? Mm-hmm. I have a nice salary, but we would love to maybe buy a house someday. Seattle's getting unaffordable way faster than my salary has risen. So so it's weird, right? It's weird to have all these like great things kind of happening around you, exciting things, but then, it doesn't affect daily life very much. It's just still slogging it out, trying to, uncover how search engines work and blog about it and, make better tools, make a better product, help customers. So it's been very similar to the last 8 years, I guess, have all been very, very similar on that front, even if the reach of the company has grown up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a lesson for all of us, is that even if we want to get somewhere, once we get there, it's not always as satisfying as you think. I think there's always new challenges and new opportunities. And I think it's all about, staying curious, always expanding your skills and your opportunities, and then taking advantage of opportunity as well. So I think we're almost out of time here. So I just want to, ask 2 quick questions, and then we can go back to your business. And so the first one is, what's the best piece of advice you received along the way?
Gosh, I think the best piece of advice that I received, which we did not listen to, and I regret it all the time, is don't focus on growth. Focus on customer happiness and low churn first, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially get people who love your software to subscribe to your software for a very, very long period of time, get them to be love it and totally rely on it. Don't worry about trying to grow that audience massively. Worry about trying to make the small audience very, very happy, and then grow slower. Yeah,
that's always good advice, right? Don't get too big for your britches and don't go overboard. What's your best piece of advice for somebody who is looking to become a digital marketer, to get a career in this industry, and just to take advantage of all that this has to offer?
Well, I think the key to being a great marketer is empathy. Being able to put yourself in the shoes of other people, other businesses, other people's influencers, other businesses' customers, and to see the world from their perspective, because then you can really speak to what they want and need. You can create, the content that they need. You can build and craft the messaging that will resonate with them. You can be in the places where they are on and off the web. And I think empathy is at the core of great marketing.
Excellent. Couldn't agree more. I think understanding people and what they're going through, and then having a solution for them, is a great way to get our products and services, wherever we're marketing, noticed. I appreciate your time today, Rand. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Awesome. Send my best.
Thanks, Rand. All right. Have a good one. All right. Bye. There you have it. Rand Fishkin. Love that guy. Been reading from him, learning from him for years, and hopefully you learned something there as well. And here's to the beginning of a great future with us in the Jumpstart podcast. So if you're listening to this on iTunes, I'd love for you to go in and rate this podcast, give us a good rating so we can show up on the charts. And if you want to see the show notes and get more information about the rest of these podcast episodes, go to jeffalytics.com/Rand and get all the information that you need. Thank you.